One of the most talked about negotiations and sales of the past decade is the purchase of Star Wars by Disney from Lucasfilms and George Lucas. In this negotiation, we see that the CEO of Walt Disney, Robert Iger, approaches George Lucas about purchasing Star Wars for the purpose of making at least 3 more films. Robert Iger asked for all of the rights to Star Wars and the entire mythos, all of the related material, and all storyboards for future films. George Lucas, in return, requested payment. He also requested that much of the staff be allowed to stay and work on the future films. His justification for this request was that many of the current employees understood all of the backstories for each character that he had set up. They understood all of the different potential abilities of each character, and there was just a wealth of knowledge of information as far as the sound and everything that had been put together over the past decades for this to come together that George Lucas really felt would be a great attribute for his the works that were to come. The underlying interest or motive of each person really comes into play in these negotiations. Robert Iger wanted to, first of all, further Disney as a company. It was currently growing. They had acquired Marvel. The Avengers are still doing incredibly well as films, and they are currently leading in the comic book world. But he also wanted to get potentially a legacy. It's been stated that Robert Iger is looking at stepping down as CEO of Disney and probably will not be making any more major acquisitions for the company. This essentially would be his legacy. George Lucas, on the other hand, wanted to ensure that his brainchild would be in the right hands to be furthered and not destroyed. This is a universe that he has spent decades building and writing, and thousands of characters over thousands of potential years of this universe that he's created, and he wanted to make sure that this was going to continue to grow, that the fans would be continue to be pleased and involved, and continue growing the fan base. So what negotiation techniques do we see portrayed in this? There are 3 that I want to look at. The negative emotions, the status, and the mutual benefit. Negative emotions that we see are in fact portrayed by George Lucas. It is said throughout this time that George Lucas was very hesitant to sell. There were many times that he was ready to back out. All in all, if he was not dead set that this was the best deal, he was ready to leave. To counter that, we see that Robert Iger used his status and position at Disney to actually help build a relationship of trust with George Lucas. As CEO, I'm not really sure how many negotiations a CEO actually does. There are typically departments and teams for that. Robert Iger felt this was important enough that he himself would handle this entire deal. It took over a year and a half to get George Lucas to actually sign the papers, and he took that time to build a level of trust with him that would really settle George Lucas and put his emotions at ease. We also see mutual benefit. George Lucas was well compensated for the world and works that he created. He was allowed to stay on and be a consultant. There were many benefits for him. On the other side, Robert Iger was given access to one of the greatest cinematic universes of this generation. Star Wars is still one of the most popular things amongst children. The universe of the first 3 reached many people of my generation, or of the prequel series, reached my generation. The animated series that airs on various children's channels is increasingly popular. So what went well things that really seemed to flow smoothly. One thing that stood out to me was Robert Iger negotiating to see the actual storyboards. George Lucas approached the situation and said, look, you need to trust me. I've done well with this series. I've built this universe. You just need to trust me that the next films are good. He didn't want to play all of his cards. Robert Iger stepped in and said, well, why don't you just allow a few of us to see this? We'll sign waivers saying we won't reveal anything. There was no one that was involved in the creative team for the film allowed to see this before the sale. They literally signed waivers for the 4 people that were key in the negotiations to be able to look at these storyboards to ensure that they were getting what they were paying for. Something that went wrong. This could easily be something that comes up in almost any negotiation for a major entity, and that was that the owner, George Lucas, was ready to walk away. His assistant said many times he got on a plane after a negotiation with Robert Iger and said he was on the verge of just walking out. There were several points where he said it would be very easy for him to just leave, and even on the day that he signed, his assistant said he was very melancholy. While he did not waver, he was also not excited or just overjoyed about everything. It was a very heavy burden for him. Was an agreement reached? Yes. In the end, Robert Iger paid George Lucas $4.05 billion for the entire Star Wars universe. Does this agreement benefit a future relationship? Yes, it truly does. First and foremost, we see that George Lucas was brought in by Disney to help not necessarily direct, but become a advisor on the future films. George Lucas wrote these characters. He knew what each person was capable of, what each character could do. It said that he would look at one person and say, no, he doesn't have that ability with the Force to do this. He understood each character. We also see that there are talks about Disney doing new Indiana Jones movies. They're currently potentially looking at recasting the role, and that is even more work that could be done together with George Lucas.